16. The forbiddance of anger. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رجلا قال للنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: أوصيني. قال: لا تغضب. فردد مرارا. قال: لا تغضب. رواه البخاري. Abu Huraira, may Allah be pleased with him, relates, a man said to the Prophet, "Give me advice." The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Do not get angry." The man asked repeatedly, and the Prophet answered each time, "Do not get angry." Reported by Bukhari.
So when we think about anger, it usually shows up in different forms. One of the forms that we tend to see it less in, but it's very powerful, is aggressive anger. When you see someone who is yelling at someone else, someone who is blaming someone else, sometimes it's shown through violence. Aggressive anger is unmistakable, but it's not the only form of anger that exists. There's also passive-aggressive. Passive-aggressive anger can be just as harmful as aggressive anger because the psychological ramifications. Sometimes you find that people hold grudges, they avoid each other, they may make snide comments, they try to undermine another person's authority in a particular space. Passive-aggressive anger is also not nice behavior. And the third form of anger that exists, but it doesn't really show up in the sense that in a overt way, but it still exists and it's still harmful, is bottled up anger. And that's where the person holds the anger in without releasing it, without doing anything about it, but it just destroys them. It destroys their health, it destroys their psychology, and it turns into hate. Now when you think about the different ways that anger shows up, whether it's aggressive or passive-aggressive or bottled up, it doesn't lead to anything positive. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he talks to us about not getting angry, there's something really powerful in the Arabic language about this concept. In English, a lot of times emotions show up as nouns. So anger is a noun. But in Arabic, when you look at the statement لا تغضب, the translation would be, don't you do anger. Don't you do anger. So you are the one who controls it. You may feel an emotion, but your response to perpetuating that emotion is a choice. And so we have to look into, where does anger really come from? And I've looked into this myself, and what I found is that anger comes from a desire to control, or feeling a lack of control over something. So if someone behaves in a way that upsets you, responding with anger is because you want to control their behavior. You don't want them to behave that way. And it's also disapproval. So you disapprove of the other person's behavior and you want to control them. Now this is something interesting for us to reflect on, because do we really have control over anyone other than our own selves? Do we really have control over anything other than our own choices? So our response to things that we don't agree with is not to need to overcome those things with a desire to control. And something that's interesting about anger is that a person turns to anger wanting to control a situation, but anger usually leads to the person losing control, having much less control over that situation. And I'm going to bring an example that hopefully isn't too taboo, and that's The Godfather. Now in The Godfather, Sonny is the one who gets angry and loses control and he dies. And Michael, his anger is, let's say it's controlled. I won't say that he did away with it, that's why it eats him up later on in life, but at least it doesn't lead him to act hastily. And haste is also something that is a result of anger. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "Isti'jal is from the shaitan." That haste is from the shaitan. So what is the prophetic response when you think about anger? We don't want to respond like Sonny. We don't want to respond like Michael Corleone, no matter how cool everyone thinks he is. He's not the example. We want to respond in a prophetic way. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he mentioned that and advised us that whenever we're angry, if we're standing, then we sit down. If we're sitting, then we lie down. And what that is important to reflect on in that situation is he's saying anger is not a state for us to act in. If we're angry, that is no time to do something. That is not a time to send an email, send a text, tweet, Facebook. That is not a time for action. That is a time to wait and let the anger pass, let the anger go. And you may say, okay, well that sounds a lot easier said than done. How do we actually let anger go? It's a process. And a point to really emphasize here is that we're never told to do anything or not do anything in Islam that we don't have control over. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would never tell us, don't do this if we don't have control over it. The Prophet ﷺ would never tell us, don't do this if we don't have some control over it. So la taghdab, don't become angry, is that statement in and of itself is an evidence that we have control. La tahzan, don't become sad in the Quran is another evidence. Wala tahinu, don't become weak is another evidence. So we have control. How do we let go of anger? Is to realize that we have control. Actually, that's exactly how you let go of anger. Anger is the response to lacking control. The way that you get rid of it is realizing that you have control. And once you realize that you have control, you look into what your choices are. I am not responsible for controlling someone else's behavior. I am not responsible for controlling another situation. I'm only responsible for my choices. And what has Allah commanded me to do with my choices? He's commanded me to have ihsan, to respond in the best way possible, to respond with excellence. So when it comes to dealing with others, our response when we're angry is to wait until the anger passes and then engage the situation in the best possible manner. So we invite them to make better choices for themselves without needing to control them and without needing them to respond to our invitation. Okay? It is a form of liberating yourself from someone else's influence over you. And the second thing that we have to keep in mind when we're dealing with others, especially those that are maybe difficult to deal with or that we feel are provoking our anger, is that our target is not them. Our goal is not them. Our transaction is not with them. Our transaction is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we deal with them in the way that would please Allah, not in the way that is going to change them or fix them or make our situation better. I mean, those are the usual responses to deal with an immediate situation for its own sake. And as Muslims, we don't do that. We deal with situations for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So our whole psychology will change when we're thinking, what would Allah love most from me in this situation? Is a very different answer in behavior and in response than how can I control this person or how can I fix this situation? Two very different psychological and emotional responses. And this is important because it does three things. If you let go of anger in the proper way, if you sit down when you're angry, if you lie down, you wait till that emotion passes and then you engage in a proactive manner, you feel better about yourself, you feel closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you feel liberated from a particular person or situation's influence or power over your inner state. You feel liberated from their control over you, and instead you are connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He is your motivator and not the situation. I say this, and I also want to recommend an article that I wrote for sahibweb.com. It's called 30 Reasons to Avoid Anger and Argumentation. You can find it online, and I encourage you to read it because it has many more gems from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ about how to deal with anger. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.